Shine.fm presents Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Here's Seth Tower Hurd.
I'm joined by Tim and Denise Harlow, and normally when you've got somebody on that's got a book, it's like, well, we're going to talk about the book, but I've known you for so long.
Who would write a book on parenting?
maybe somebody out there. I've known you for so long that I just saw your kids do great in life, and as I was looking through, well, how do we talk about parenting in a way that's really practical? Because a lot of times, a lot of those books wind up being analogies and things. You're like, well, what do I do with this? So if I can set up your story. So you guys are coming into Chicago in your late 20s, I believe, right?
And mid-20s for her.
Mid-20s.
Later 20s for me.
Yes.
You have you got a 2-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And
she had an accident in the nursery. We were potty training, so she had an accident in the nursery on our visiting weekend.
Oh my gosh.
That's the history. That's the one who has 2 kids now. Yeah.
Okay, so you come in and you basically take over a church that, I guess knowing what I know in life, I would have been like, I don't know if this thing's going to work, dude. And for 8 years, you just really try to live out the gospel in a church that's not doing real well, maybe not dying, on the verge of, quote unquote, going bankrupt week to week, but you get 8 really hard years. And in that you have 2 more kids. And now we can fast forward to say that, to go from the church of a little room full of people to, tens of thousands of people calling Parkview Christian Church home. And your kids, I came into your life about 14 years ago because of radio. So I saw one of them go from about 6th grade into adulthood. I saw one of them go, closer to high school and adulthood. And, I've got all their numbers, all their spouses' phone numbers, I consider them all friends, and they all turned out great. Here's where I want to drill into your story, because I also know people that are raised in ministry families that, man, as soon as they get to college, and sometimes Christian college, substance abuse problems, and it's like, well, where did that come from? And it's like, nobody ever taught them that they were going to be adults, and it just blindsided them.
Yeah.
So let's start there. Did you have the foresight to look at your, 2 and 6 and 8 and 10 and 12-year-olds as they were coming up, or, just pick ages and say, okay, you're going to be an adult. You're going to be able to do whatever you want when you leave my home. And I need to help you step into that now, step into, faith, step into actual just maturity, things like knowing how to do your laundry. Were you guys thinking about that as your kids were growing up, or did you just adjust a lot?
I think, first of all, we want to let everybody know we had 3 daughters, so I know nothing about raising boys. So let's just preface that. So some of this may transfer just
and
fine,
they're
but
20,
I don't know.
25, 27, and 30, so
yes.
It was a while ago.
Yeah. Quite a few years ago. Yeah. But honestly, we actually did a lot of intentional parenting. I really had a passion for doing parenting and doing it the best I possibly could, and going into it, nobody knows anything, so I just wanted to keep learning from any source I could, and was involved in MOPS and went to
started MOPS.
Yes, here at our church.
She knew we needed it, so she started
MOPS is
it.
Mothers of Preschoolers, if you don't know.
Yeah, really good ministry.
Okay, so you just really, as you went along, found wisdom.
Yes.
Basically is a good way to say this.
But I also thought of, and Tim did too, not so much because he's a live in the moment kind of person, have fun. But I also thought, okay, if we do this, are they going to turn around and do that and think this is going to be the norm? I that was always playing in my mind. It's just my personality anyway. But
in-game stuff. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for us too, we were struggling to do ministry in a context that we didn't really understand, and was hard. And I think there was an advantage to that, in that our kids were doing it at the same time, and we shielded them from as much as we could as far as the negative stuff that was going on in the church. But they were living, and I don't know if it would be the same today, but they were in the public school system. We couldn't afford private school. It didn't matter anyway. Homeschooling wasn't really on the table for us at that point. That wouldn't have been her gift mix.
Yeah.
And she was busy, working at church with me. So I think we took them into the context of doing ministry with their friends and trying to reach their friends and trying to understand that, all the way through. So I think there's a balance. If you start sheltering them too much, and they're always around their Christian friends, and that's the only people they ever know, and that's all they ever get, then when they go to college, then it's Amish Rumspringa time, and they're just like, wow, and there's the rest of the world out there. So we kind of let them experience that as they went.
Actually, I do want to turn a corner here real quick. So the book you wrote is about taking the gospel out to, first and foremost, your actual neighbors.
Right. Yeah.
I remember the line you used, who is my neighbor? It's your neighbor.
It might be.
It's not that hard to interpret. Who lives next to you?
Right.
I know that there's certainly been, when I'm thinking about my own upbringing, there was like kind of this movement in the 80s and 90s of like, oh, well, non-Christian kids aren't safe for you, youth group kid. When in reality, I mean, if you get enough kids in a youth group, something bad's going to be going on somewhere anyway.
Two kids.
So the book is quite a bit about, the steps to getting out there and loving your neighbor and sharing the gospel with them. And your kids, as I have seen them as, high school kids and as adults, they are wonderfully mature examples of how to love somebody and, that doesn't believe what you believe and hold tight to your faith and maintain friendships. Walk me through how that worked, because I just have seen a lot of people that did the, non-Christians are scary, stay away from non-Christians. Yeah. And maybe they quote unquote don't like falter, but they also don't ever share the gospel with anybody, which is like the reason we're alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, honestly, this is my opinion, but I think good kids, just in general, gravitate towards good kids, if that's their real foundation. And even though their friends weren't Christians, they were good kids. They were decent kids. They didn't really have deep friendships with potheads or whatever.
No.
Goths, whatever you call them today, I don't know.
We wouldn't let them date them, or whatever. But yeah, no. I mean, some of their friends were Christians. It wasn't like there weren't any Christians around. They hung out with their church friends, and they had, Christian friends, really a lot of them in other churches along the way. But what she's saying is they were usually in an environment where there were other kids that had the same goals, whether it was a music program or, an educational program or whatever. They were in the same goals. I don't think, and I also want to say, there's no guarantee this is ever going to work out the way you want it to work out.
Yeah.
We feel very blessed that our children, turned out the way that they did. God had Satan, and Satan didn't turn out well. So there's no specific thing you can answer. But we thought it was really important for them to be in the world while we were overseeing them. So then if there were bad things, we could confront them. We could, once the internet came along, we could figure out how to filter it in our home and put the computer. She had the computer right in the kitchen. We had a desk right in the, in the family room in the kitchen, so that we always knew what was going on. But at the same time, we wanted them to be around those other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would have those kids over a lot. That was part of our parenting style, was to let these kids be in our home, be around.
Try to make our home the party home,
Yeah.
Make our home the fun place.
Yeah. And, if I can just tell a little bit of a story on you here, because I would certainly say there are people in ministry that, that are getting the check from preaching on Sunday mornings and really don't hardly know anybody that isn't a believer. And I mean, I used to live right here, a couple miles away. I went to this church. I have met your actual neighbors that were non-attendees, maybe had some church background, that are now committed followers of Christ because you guys actually talked to them. So I got to think that probably them actually seeing you actually preach this stuff and then actually do it has got to be pretty beneficial. I think
that's where our kids had an advantage, and to the parent out there who are in ministry, maybe listening to us, there's an advantage because they knew what we stood for. Another family that was friends with us, they knew who we were and what we stood for. I think it kind of gave our kids a step forward in the relationships.
Well, and because we both grew up in ministry homes, we really had a strong belief in realizing, because we'd seen good and bad turnouts of other families, that if you're a hypocrite at home, from what you say at church, kids will go running the other way. You have to have integrity in your life. You have to practice what you preach, literally. And if you don't do that,
and not hide stuff.
Right. And we also really tried to stay involved with our neighbors. Whereas, like you said, some Christians want to stay in a bubble. Well, we went to every block party that we possibly could. We let the kids play outside. We were home. I was home for trick-or-treating. And we
didn't boycott Halloween.
No, we didn't. And yeah, and we even had like neighbors over whenever we could. So we tried to, yeah. And when there was a baby in the block or the neighborhood, we ran to take a meal, and I made sure the girls were involved in that, whether they went to our church or not. And when we moved in, nobody in our neighborhood went to our church.
Yeah, that was key, making sure they were involved in that stuff too.
You know, if I can just kind of give a little bit of a silly example, but something we've all seen as far as just practicing what you preach. Everybody's been at a restaurant where the parent yells at their kid to get off their phone, and the parent's doing it. And I mean, fortunately I'm married, because if I was single, I'd probably be like, hi. Yeah. I just wondered what the heck you're thinking. I'm just curious. I know. You know, fortunately, you get married and somebody stops you from doing those things.
We're all fortunate that you got married.
Let's dive in a little bit to, you know, those transition years when you go from elementary school and your kids are pretty much just hanging off your leg because they think you were the coolest thing in the world, to we just know about human development, that, you know, you hit junior high, specifically like, man, 6th to 7th grade, 7th to 8th grade, and then like, you know, 14 to 16, those are drastically different life experiences for everybody, right? Yes. And so your kids start to pull away from you. And, you know, if you listen to this and you got a 2-year-old, your 2-year-old's going to start to pull away from you at some point. Tell me about that experience, and what would you like to have known going into it?
Well, one thing that I had learned from somebody else was, and I really based a lot on...
Let me stop you right there. She was amazing at that, at learning something from somebody else. You know, I'm more clueless. I'm just kind of like going for the feel of it. But she was always reading, bringing home ideas, talking about it. That's what the MOPS program was good for in the early years. So she was fantastic at
very
that.
Inspirational. But I had learned that you have to have this foundation of love for your kids, that they just know they are unconditionally loved. But you have to be strict when they're young. And as they actually get in high school, you can actually really loosen up, because they understand what the rules are and that you love them. You know, it wasn't for just the image or anything else. And high school was a blast.
It really was.
We loved high school. It was really sad to see that stage go. Junior high, not so much. You want to put them in a little box, but they're insecure, they're figuring out who they are.
They got the attitude thing going on. And you crack down when you have to, and you know, let it fly when you were ready. But I mean, case in point, I bought, this is not a Dave Ramsey approved idea, but I bought them all a cheap junker car when they turned 16.